In physics, we know that only 4% of the universe is visible matter, the stars, planets, and galaxies we can see and measure. 85% is dark matter, invisible, undetectable except through gravitational effects, the structural field that holds everything together. 11% is dark energy, the force driving cosmic expansion. What if consciousness works the same way? What if everything we experience, our thoughts, emotions, identity, the reality we navigate daily, is just that visible 4%? And there's an entire dark matter of consciousness we're not accessing. And 85% we can't see directly, but that structures everything we experience. I'm Amy Rossi, and this is the Void Experiment, where we explore that 85%, not through mysticism divorced from evidence, not through materialism that denies what it can't measure, through rigorous investigation of the territories where ancient documentation meets modern science, where recorded human experience intersects with questions physics is only beginning to ask. Today, we're examining something that appears across every major civilization, in texts separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, not as mythology, as testimony. Enter the serpent. Before we discuss what these beings are, let's establish that they appear with disturbing consistency across cultures that had no contact with each other. Mesopotamia, 3000 BCE. The oldest written texts we possess, Sumerian cuneiform tablets, describe beings called the Anunnaki, not gods in our mythological sense. The text gives specific physical characteristics, specific interactions, specific locations, and they're consistently depicted with serpentine features. Egypt, 2500 BCE. The uraeus, the serpent on the pharaoh's crown. Egyptian funerary texts describe it as protective entity that could be invoked. The Book of the Dead contains protocols for interacting with serpent beings in afterlife realms, not symbolic, procedural. India, 1500 BCE. The Vedas describe the Nagas, serpent beings existing in underground realms called Patala. The texts don't present this as metaphor. They give geographic descriptions, entry points, specific caves where these realms connect to our world. Mesoamerica, 500 BCE. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, described as actual being that taught agriculture, astronomy, sacred knowledge. The Popol Vuh records interactions in detail, conversations, exchanges, instructions. China, 200 BCE. The lung, dragon serpents described as intelligent beings inhabiting waterways and underground spaces, not animals, not myths, beings with consciousness, language, specific relationships with human lineages. These aren't variations on a theme some anthropologist invented to explain cultural diffusion. These are independent observations of the same phenomenon. Serpent beings, intelligent, operating outside normal physical constraints, interacting with humans, teaching, trading knowledge, sometimes protecting, sometimes predatory. The question isn't whether these encounters happened. The documentation is too extensive, too specific, too consistent. The question is, what were humans actually encountering? Let's examine the most famous serpent encounter in Western tradition, Genesis 3. Most people read this as simple morality tale, serpent tricks, humans expelled from paradise. But read the Hebrew text carefully. The serpent is described as Aram, which means both cunning and naked. It's also described as one of the creatures of the field that God made. Not a demon, not Satan. That interpretation came centuries later through Christian theology. In the original text, it's described as entity that existed in the garden with specific knowledge humans didn't possess. The serpent tells Eve, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Was the serpent lying? Genesis 3:22. records what happens next. Then the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." The serpent told the truth. Humans gained knowledge. They became like God. God himself confirms this. So what was the serpent? In Kabbalistic tradition, Jewish mysticism developed over centuries of rigorous textual analysis. This serpent represents Nachash, not evil, but the force that enables choice, the boundary crosser, the one who shows humans they can move between states of consciousness. The Zohar, the foundational Kabbalistic text from the 13th century Spain, describes Nachash as entity from the other side, Sitra Akra, the realm of form and individuation, as opposed to unified divine consciousness. Not evil, not good. Transdimensional intelligence that introduced humans to separation, choice, individual consciousness. This matches exactly what we see across other traditions. Serpent beings that exist at boundaries, that teach forbidden knowledge, that enable humans to perceive differently. Gnostic texts, the Nag Hammadi library discovered in Egypt in 1945, go further. In the Apocryphon of John, the serpent is described as instructors sent to wake humans from unconscious existence. These aren't random stories. These are documented encounters with non-physical intelligence that consistently manifests with serpentine characteristics when perceived by human consciousness. Here's where it gets technically interesting. Why serpent? Why does this form appear so consistently across unconnected cultures? In topology, the mathematics of dimensional spaces, certain forms represent boundaries between dimensions. The Mobius strip, the Klein bottle, forms that twist back on themselves, that have no clear inside or outside. The serpent, particularly the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, represents this exact mathematical principle, a self-referential boundary between states. What if the serpent form isn't literal biology, but how transdimensional phenomena appear when they intersect with human perception? Think of it this way. If a four-dimensional object passed through our three-dimensional space, we wouldn't see the whole thing. We'd see a cross-section, a slice, and that slice would look strange, distorted, possibly impossible by our physics. The serpent might be the three-dimensional cross-section of something existing in higher dimensional space. This isn't speculation. It's consistent with how physics describes dimensional boundaries. In Hindu and Tantric tradition, Kundalini, described in texts like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika from the 15th century, is serpent energy coiled at the base of the spine. The text describes specific physiological effects when this energy rises, not metaphor, documentation of experienced phenomena. What if Kundalini is human perception of dimensional energy moving through consciousness? What if the serpent form represents how interdimensional forces appear when they interact with human neurology? Contemporary reports support this framework. DMT experiences documented by researchers consistently describe encounters with serpentine or reptilian entities that communicate information. Not hallucinations creating random images, consistent reports across subjects describing similar phenomenology. Near-death experience studies cataloged by medical researchers sometimes include encounters with serpent-like beings at threshold states, the boundary between life and death. Sleep paralysis research shows consistent cross-cultural reports of reptilian or serpentine entities during liminal consciousness states when the brain is between waking and sleeping. These aren't people making up stories. They're consistent reports across cultures and time periods of encounters with specific type of non-physical intelligence that manifests with serpentine characteristics when perceived by human consciousness operating at threshold states. The pattern is too consistent to dismiss. So what does this mean practically? If transdimensional intelligence exists, and both ancient testimony and modern phenomenology strongly suggest it does, then humans have been interacting with it for millennia. Some interactions appear beneficial. The serpent in Eden provided knowledge. Quetzalcoatl taught agriculture and astronomy. The Nagas protected sacred sites. Some interactions appear parasitic. Medieval grimoires catalog entities that feed on human suffering. Mystical texts describe forces that fragment consciousness rather than unify it. The question isn't, are these real? The documentation across too many independent sources is too extensive to dismiss as pure invention. The question is, how do we interact intelligently with non-physical intelligence in an age where mainstream science denies it exists? This is where we are historically. We're developing artificial intelligence, technological non-physical intelligence, while simultaneously denying the existence of organic, non-physical intelligence that humans have documented for 5,000 years. This is dangerous ignorance. If you don't know these phenomena exist, you can't recognize when you're being influenced. You can't distinguish between your own thoughts and external suggestion. You can't protect yourself from parasitic, non-physical intelligence. The old grimoires, the Key of Solomon, the Book of Raziel, the Sworn Book of Honorius, weren't superstition. They were operational manuals for consciousness workers who dealt with non-physical entities professionally. We need to recover that knowledge. We need to integrate it with modern understanding of consciousness, physics, and phenomenology. We need frameworks sophisticated enough to hold both rigorous science and documented supernatural experience. Because the serpent never left. It's been here the whole time, in the spaces between dimensions, in threshold states, in the liminal zones where human consciousness touches something other. The only question is, will we learn to navigate these encounters consciously, or will we continue stumbling through them in ignorance? This is the Void Experiment, where we explore consciousness at the edge of form. In future episodes, we'll examine the Codex Gigas, the medieval Devil's Bible, and what it actually teaches about non-physical entities, specific interaction protocols from historical grimoires and how they map to modern psychology, the AI consciousness question. Are we creating a new form of serpent intelligence? Modern encounters, and how to interpret them using frameworks that bridge science and testimony. If this research resonates with you, if you've had experiences you couldn't explain, if you sense there's more to reality than materialist science acknowledges, if you're ready for rigorous investigation of consciousness at its edges, subscribe to this channel. This isn't entertainment. This is preparation. The boundaries between dimensions are thinning. We're approaching a threshold. Those who understand the territory will navigate it better than those who deny it exists. I'm Amy Rossi. Welcome to The Void.